Hi, everybody, and welcome to our second Corporate Synergies pre-election webinar, where we'll once again be looking at the impact of the 2020 election on healthcare policy and employer-sponsored employee benefits. But this time, joining me today are two special guests from the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, or CIAB, Joel Wood and Joel Copperwood, who I will introduce shortly. But first, just as some quick background on the CIAB. The CIAB is our industry lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. And really, while they are our organization's voice and our industry's voice, the CIAB is also really your voice. Since at Corporate Synergies, we're always listening to you, our clients, and trying our best to be your trusted advocates and advisors and to represent you in your interests as best as we can in all things, whether political or otherwise. So, the Joel is joining us today from CIAB are listening to all of your questions and concerns about employee benefits and healthcare and what it means, what the election is going to do to impact those things for 2021 and the years to come. And they're both regularly, really on a daily basis, discussing those concerns directly with senators and House representatives, other key decision makers in DC on both sides of the aisle, right there in the chambers and the halls where the regulatory sausage is being made. So I'm just overjoyed really to have the Joels here with us today. And before I introduce them, let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm Dan Kuperstein, Senior Vice President of Compliance at Corporate Synergies. I'm an ERISA employee benefits attorney specializing in health and welfare plans and insurance arrangements. And as part of my job, I really enjoy helping our clients from across the country with developing strategies for reducing their exposure to regulatory risks and liabilities. And that's going to be a big focus of what we'll be talking about today. And to introduce the Joels, Joel Wood is the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at CIAB and also oversees Council PAC, the association's Political Action Committee. He's been the top regulatory and government affairs officer at CIAB since 1993. He came to Washington as a press and legislative director for Representative Don Sundquist. Over the course of his career, Mr. Wood has been deeply engaged in many issues impacting the commercial insurance brokerage industry, from health insurance reform efforts to terrorism reinsurance to regulatory reforms, large and small, federal and state levels. He's also received numerous accolades as one of the top lobbyists in the financial services industry. And also joining with me today here is Joel Copperwood. He is the Vice President of Government Affairs at CIAB. He represents council member firms and their political interests on Capitol Hill, working closely with members of Congress and their staff on issues impacting the commercial insurance brokerage industry, including issues impacting the employer-provided employee benefits market, property and casualty insurance, and federal natural catastrophe policies. That's a lot to say there. Specifically, Mr. Copperwood has worked on reform of the Affordable Care Act and was instrumental in the council's successful efforts to guide legislation through Congress that renewed TRIA and created a national broker licensing regime. Prior to the CIAB, he worked at Global USA Inc., where he directed the group's political, legislative, and regulatory work on international trade and export control issues. And Mr. Copperwood has also lobbied at the Financial Services Roundtable, where he worked on a number of policy initiatives and legislative campaigns relating to insurance and financial services. So thank you both for joining us today and for coming back. I should say coming back because we've had you join us in the past, and it's always a pleasure to have both of you. So just to get us started here today, and in our last webinar in our series of election coverage webinars, we gave a little bit of information about the lay of the land or political landscape that exists out there prior to the election. And just to really quickly and generally summarize, right, we know that President Trump wants to replace the current healthcare system under the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, with something that's less costly, has better outcomes, and that still protects pre-existing conditions. We know that on the other side, Vice President Biden seeks to continue the ACA in its current form, but he said he will make some tweaks to it to increase its coverage and scope, including increasing access to lower cost healthcare options for seniors, lower income citizens, and immigrants. And of course, there's some topics that they both agree on, such as reducing surprise medical bills, lowering prescription drug costs, and making Medicare benefits richer and more flexible. But rather than me talking about all this stuff and boring you guys to death, let's give it directly to the experts themselves to talk about the lay of the land and kind of what's happening on each side of the aisle right now. So Joel Wood, you want to maybe get us started?
I think there we are.
There we go.
Dan, thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. It was a lot more fun when we were in Manhattan together last year, addressing the crowd. On your cover there, you see me on the left and Joel on the right. We really should sort of flip those out. I'm the Joel that tilts right, and he's the Joel that tilts left. He's going to argue with today that your characterization is correct, that a President Biden would tweak the ACA, and I'm going to argue that there are much more existential threats to employer-provided coverage. So, as you noted, our trade association, only 200 member firms in the property casualty arena. On commercial property casualty, that's over 90% of all the premiums, and in the employee benefits marketplace prior to the lockdown, of 180 plus million Americans that receive their health insurance through their employer. About 110 million of them are in plans that our member firms place, great firms like Corporate Synergy, Foundation Risk Partners. It's weird though, I mean, even though 2/3, if you added up all of the revenue of all of our member firms, 2/3 of it would be commercial property casualty, 1/3 of it would be in the benefits arena. But if you look at what Joel and I have done and our team have done over the years, especially since the ACA, it's almost the flip of that, because all of the, as I said, existential threats in commercial insurance brokerage and in taking care of employers have come on the benefits side. Forgive me if there's any background noise. You noted that we are always lobbying in the halls of Congress. Right now, I'm in the hall of a Hilton Hotel in Nashville in the lobby. And it's a long story. And so we're getting used to this laptop thing in front of us becoming our office, and virtual lobbying has been really challenging for us. So here we are, 13. I'm going to hand it over to Joel because, you know, he's decidedly more upbeat, got a little jaunt in his step right now than I am, particularly with respect to congressional control. Here we are 13 days out. When we did up this little slide, we figured, well, there's 9 toss-up Senate races. The reality is now you've got that playing field is expanding. And there are 12 very competitive Republican-held seats, and there are 2 very competitive Democratic-held seats. And so just do the math. It's a tough situation. Next slide. I'm going to do these two slides, and then I'll hand over to Joel for his 30,000 feet on this. First of all, the obvious, is there going to be a deal? You know, there's been, this cliffhanger of Mnuchin, who desperately wants a deal, Trump, who wanted to go small, then he wanted to go big, McConnell balking. I just still, you're recording this, so it could come back and bite me. I still just don't see a deal before the election, and I do see the lame duck as being extremely active. The question then is going to be, how much will they want to get done in that lame duck, as opposed to Democrats wanting to decide if they have a tsunami of a year, where whether they're better off waiting till they actually get in office. Let me read this. Cook Political Report. Charlie Cook is the best nonpartisan political pundit in Washington. We use him a lot. Now, Charlie screwed it up like everybody did in 2016 in misreading the swing states. But this was Charlie today with the headline, "With tension draining out of the presidential race, will GOP voters stay home?" The drama and uncertainty that seems to have leaked out of the presidential race has found its way into the fight for the control of the U.S. Senate. If you are into either electoral politics or congressional policy, the range of possible outcomes in next month's elections is dizzying. On one end of the spectrum, we could plausibly see Republicans hold their losses, just 1 or 2 seats, coming out with a bare majority. On the other end, they face 12 competitive races to only 2 for Democrats, and an electoral wipeout for the GOP is very much on the table. Contrast that with the presidential race, where something pretty major, would have to happen to bring President Trump up to even a competitive position. I could go on with that. So you can hit to the next slide. But Joel, your thoughts right now, and you're on the Zoom calls all the time with Democratic members of Congress and challengers out there. What are you?
Yeah, I was just on a call at 12 o'clock today with the leader of the Blue Dog Caucus, Stephanie Murphy, and she shared some interesting stories. I mean, everything that you said I think is spot on about the competitive nature of the election, with the Senate majority being in the balance and all of that. We'll go into those races later on. We're also going to go into the issues that we're lobbying. An interesting story that I hadn't heard was how contentious, obviously, it's really contentious. But it's boiling over onto the House floor. You know, there was a frontline member who's a former CIA operative who they were running ads against her, accusing her of being a terrorist. And she confronted the Republican, the guy who's in charge of the NRCC on the floor, and it's boiling over. That doesn't hold well to prospects for bipartisanship in the next Congress, unfortunately. But big picture, I mean, this has been a big year. Obviously, pre-COVID, we had a lot of issues that we were lobbying on. Most of them were privy to the benefits market and the future of employer-sponsored insurance. But you know, aside from that, and this deal in the package that maybe they'll be negotiating something. I still don't think we'll see light at the end of the day, but it sounds like Mnuchin and Pelosi are getting closer and closer. But we've been working on more liquidity, right, to make sure to get a robust PPP program to keep all of your clients head above water. We've been working on COBRA subsidies to ensure that folks can stay on their employer-sponsored insurance plans through this crisis. We've been working on the Safe Banking Act. There's a whole bunch of issues, liability protections for companies that are reopening and want to keep their clients safe. You know, there's all kinds of issues that we've got wrapped up in this deal. So when this goes down, and that's just from a broker perspective, every single lobbyist I'm on calls with, they've all got their parochial issues that all of downtown Washington is screaming that they cannot reach a deal right now. And we're seeing every day that they fail to reach a deal is going to make the consequences that much more worse as they delay this. So I'm hopeful that they can get a deal. I don't think it's actually going to happen. McConnell just released a statement saying that Pelosi, that if a deal is reached, all it is going to mean is wheelbarrows of cash for blue states. That was his argument this afternoon against the deal. So I'm not optimistic that there's going to be a lot of bipartisanship moving forward anytime soon. But yeah, Joel, do you have any? Yeah, next slide. I mean, this is,
you know, you've got a little bit of a partisan tinge to it on that with Mitch, but I don't fundamentally disagree. And when he drew the firm red line in the sand for the next package having to have liability reforms, that was an absolute. And the kind of liability reforms, you know, you and I can argue about what's you know, whether Democrats would ever be reasonable on this stuff, but I think you would agree with me that the kind of liability reforms that Mitch McConnell wants to see as a bare minimum are just not going to be in the offing in any particular deal. And he's got his caucus behind him on that. So now on to, you know, throw on top of this, next Monday, ACB is going to be confirmed by the Senate. I'm not sure what the timing, they're going to bring it up for a vote on Monday. I don't know how long the actual debate is going to go. She acquitted herself well in terms of, you know, there's no significant problems during the hearing, but you know, it has underscored just incredible philosophical tension. And when you look at the potential for a Democratic sweep, it is, you know, I'm not Chicken Little here, but there are a lot of things that will be on the line, including the issue potentially of packing the court and adding more justices. There's a tremendous amount of pent up fury among the Democratic base. You know, I think the legislative filibuster is extremely threatened right now. It depends on the margin. If Democrats win back the Senate with 51-49, filibuster may be here to stay. If not, if it's 53-54, that's only going to contribute to even more partisanship. And so you will only have to get to 51, not to that magic 60 number, to advance most major legislation. Next slide. So, Joel, let's talk about stabilization of the ACA. So yeah, clearly, you know, I would not argue Joe Biden is not Bernie Sanders, and arguably Joe Biden is the nominee and strong favorite to win. because of Bernie and the overreach, perceived overreach on Medicare for all. And so you had everybody picking their Mayor Pete, Amy, Kamala, the other candidates had all dropped off, and all of a sudden Bernie was the front runner, and Democratic primary voters were like, whoa, you know, we liked other candidates more than Joe, but we're not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so I think Biden understands extremely well the price that President Obama paid in the midterm elections after the ACA was passed over that issue of, if you like your insurance, you get to keep it. And so, next slide. I think a lot of what really alarms us is over the core Biden proposal in support of a quote unquote public option, and how much might that erode ESI, employer-sponsored coverage, for both small insurers and large insurers. In the debate with Trump, when he got a couple of words in edgewise, he said the public option would just be there for only those who are, for whom there is no other option. However, if you go on the Biden website, there's a lot of things that concern us. He wants to double the subsidies in all of the exchanges. He wants to eliminate the provision that says that if you have equivalent or superior coverage by your employer, that you're not eligible for subsidies in the exchange. He wants to expand tax credits for individual coverage. He wants to lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60. We've got and in order for a public option to work inside of the exchanges, you've got to populate it with younger and healthier workers. And so everything that I see in their proposals move toward that. And if we don't bend the healthcare cost curve, you know, there's just a great fear that employers are going to just throw up their hands, and the options to be able to subsidize their employees and get a good tax-free, pay them to go buy the public option that's hinged on Medicare prices that we know are so ridiculously off. See, I got a cameo going behind me, that are, you know, in New York, for example, the average private plan pays out 350% more than the Medicare reference price. Now, would it be based on pure Medicare? Would it be Medicare plus something? You know, a lot would be debated. I'm not saying that the sky is falling, but there's a lot of concern about the continuum of this. And I would only urge anyone to Google up Paul Krugman, the very liberal columnist for the New York Times. Last week wrote a piece saying, and he you know, Nobel Prize winning, Medicare for all extolling, and he wrote an op-ed about how wonderful Biden care would be towards getting to achieve those objectives. So tell me why I'm over concerned here, Joel.
Yeah, no, I think those are all valid concerns. The one thing I would point to, for better or worse, is this, you know, the next Congress is going to be inheriting what they consider cascading crises, right? They are going to, first of all, we know HR 1 is going to be an economic stimulus package. They're going to do something to address the global health pandemic, the national health crisis that we are in. They are talking about folding into the economic stimulus, doing a really big infrastructure package that will also include green energy components, and there will be some kind of tax reform component to help pay for that. And then there's going to be an ACA package. And that's a lot. That's a lot of political capital that these guys are going to be spending early on, particularly political capital for members of Congress that represent traditionally Trump or red districts. So they're not going to, the party as a whole is being pulled more towards the center rather than the progressive. So the progressive AOC, robust public option, Medicare for all portion of the party is being diminished as we gain more seats in the center. So what that means when it comes to an ACA package, the primary focus is going to be to stabilize the markets, to stop the hemorrhaging, and as they consider other options for exchanges and a public option, I think that the chances of it being robust or vibrant are going to be not quite as threatening as they were a couple months ago.
So Joel, for the first time, just got a little puppy a few weeks ago, and I think this is the first time he's getting any of it. This is a good slide, just demonstrating our concerns about what happens if healthcare coverage shifts away from the marketplace. I should note here as well that one of the big things that I do want to see happen, and it would be a benefit probably of a Democratic sweep, is subsidies for COBRA coverage for the millions that are still unemployed. We saw in the HEROES Act that the $3.5 trillion House Pact passed partisan bill, but there were 100% subsidies. Then when they tried to scale it back in this sort of back and forth of political blame games, they stripped out the COBRA coverage from it, which is concerning. They left all of your provisions on medical marijuana or on marijuana financial services in the thing, but took out the COBRA subsidies. What I think that could emerge in a package, whether we're talking lame duck or early next year, would be, some level, after the financial downturn in 2008-9, Congress passed 60% COBRA subsidies. And so I think we may see something along that line. So hit to the next slide, Dan. I would also note, it's interesting, we've got the largest political action committee in the insurance industry. We're very active. We spend a lot of our money and give you a big bill, Dan, for advocacy. And we really did not have much of a relationship with the Harris office, primarily because she was on 5 different committees, but none of them touched on insurance matters. We care about the banking committee, the finance committee, health, education, labor and pensions committee, to a lesser extent, commerce committee, but she wasn't on any of them. And that showed in her own campaign, which torpedoed based on her comments on Medicare for All and her handling of that. She was sort of all over the map. That famous town hall with Jake Tapper, when he asked her, "Are you for Medicare for All?" And she says, "Absolutely, 100% with Bernie." And he says, "Well, what does that mean for people that like their insurance and want to keep it?" She says, "Well, they're going to have to go." And she spent the next week backing off of that. And so I think she's a little out of her element on the healthcare related stuff. I'm not saying she isn't a brilliant, skilled legislator, and I'm not making a political commentary there. Just an observation that I think that I don't look to her to be that pivotal on this stuff, but it's going to be interesting to watch. Next one up. Joel, I'll let you talk about surprise billing, but it's wildly frustrating to everyone, particularly the hedge fund angle on it as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about the ACA stabilization stuff that's going to happen in the next package, I think there's going to be a lot of health-related bills that have been considered in this last Congress that will be part of that package, and one of them was an issue that we've been lobbying on, which is ending surprise medical billing. And this has been an interesting issue. Everyone's on board with banning balance bills. The question is, what do they do with that balance, and what do they charge? And it's really turned into a debate between the providers and the insurance industry, and what the metric is going to be as to how these providers get compensated for out-of-network services that are provided at the end of the day. But regardless, the momentum for banning surprise medical billing is tremendous. Both sides of the aisle support it in both chambers, and there's going to be a solution on this in an ACA bill. You can go to the next slide. These numbers just show, the depth, the seriousness of the issue, and how almost anyone that goes to an emergency room is going to experience some sort of a surprise medical bill. So I would anticipate this getting fixed in the next package. You can go to the next slide. Also in that package, go one more slide, is going to be reining in prescription drug prices. So we have spent a lot of time over the past decade, post ACA, there's been a mantra going around. The ACA wasn't a healthcare reform, it was health insurance reform. And they have done nothing to rein in costs. And we've been talking for the past 10 years that we need to get to the root of it, which is rising costs. And we have been successful in steering their direction ever so slowly, so much so actually that we saw bipartisan legislation being reported out of the Senate Help Committee last summer, that it was a baby step forward, but it just required price transparency. And so you could follow the dollar, particularly through PBMs, and looking at the roles that PBMs play. That's a really big, important issue for brokers, just to get, and to be able to access some of the data that PBMs are sitting on so that brokers can design more efficient packages for their clients. That was a big bill. It had the support of the chairman and the ranking member. It didn't come to the floor for a vote, but I think that reining in drug prices is going to be a top priority for the next Congress.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Joel, but it definitely is a reflection of the power of the pharmaceutical industry. They hated this bill. And I think that's a good graphic there of how torturous all of this is. Let me just give you, I'm going to give you one, I can try to do this in like 90 seconds example myself, and of just how difficult this is. And we all know the issues associated with specialty drugs in particular, and the astronomical prices. You hear the insulin examples, but the multi-million-dollar gene therapies and the like. So my kid, who I'm here in Nashville with, he's 23 years old, has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, really crappy disease. All the kids that are diagnosed with this are jacked up on corticosteroids, not too different than what Donald Trump was on COVID. And we all know that corticosteroids have tremendous side effects. And we stopped counting the number of bones that James broke. Prednisone, been out there for 50, 60 years, nickel a pill, that's what we were on, terrible side effects, but it helped. It was anti-inflammatory, and he's still alive today because of it. We'd heard about 10, 12 years ago about it, just anecdotally from other parents, that about a different corticosteroid that was available for a different indication on the European markets. And the kids seemed to do just as well, maybe even a little better with far fewer side effects. So we were blessed to have the resources to be able to go. It was legal for us to get a script and ship it over from London. I paid $7,000 a year for it. We were happy to do so. Meanwhile, small biotech out of Chicago says this is very intriguing. They run the trials. They made the investment. As for getting a drug approved by the FDA, this is minuscule, but they invested $150 million to try to prove that this drug is just as good as prednisone and has far fewer side effects. And boom, in about 4 years, they successfully did so. Now, they gambled. Now, every kid in America that has Duchenne muscular dystrophy can have a doc that can write a script out for that drug. And so this is good. It's great news. And so my kid switches over to that. Price tag, $88,000 a year. Now, a lot of insurers aren't doing it, so people have backup Medicaid. Then on top of that, their marginal cost for making each one of the pills is probably $1 or so. But they have a patient fund, a patient access fund for all those who can't get the insurers to pay for these drugs, and they get to take enormous tax credits off of that. I think most people are shocked to know that, number one charity in America, not surprising, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Number two charity in America, the AbbVie Patient Assistance Fund, maker of Humira. I don't know what that is, $30,000 a year. If you look at the top 20 list of the top charities in America, most of them are drug companies. So it's a torturous thing. There needs to be radical transparency, we believe, throughout the entire ecosystem, including on brokerage. So we are, this is going to be a major priority for us. And then the last thing before we move off of this is just back to the surprise balance billing issue. It's very troubling to see the proliferation of hedge funds that have been buying up specialty physician practices that will not negotiate with the health plans. Their business model is based on this enormous slamming and pursuit of consumers, and so something's got to give. We thought we were going to resolve this battle last summer in the before times. And those hedge funds slammed about a $50 million campaign to get Congress to back off. So it's going to get done. It's an important priority for us. So.
One other quick question for you that's kind of related, and I know a lot of our clients have a lot of questions about that. You talked about the strength of the pharmaceutical industry and their strength in Washington. But what about, both candidates have said they really support prescription drug importation, of course, with, exceptions for safety and things like that. Where do you guys see that going, in the years to come here?
Joel, I'll let you handle it.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to follow up with Joel by saying, this is the one issue that's got bipartisan support, and no matter who controls the next Congress, I think this is some form or fashion of reining in drug pricing is going to happen. When it comes to buying across borders, that's a big issue for brokers and for their clients because it's a workaround the current regulatory system we have here. I don't know that Democrats that's not the solution. Right? That's a Band-Aid, and that doesn't get to the solution. I will say Democrats are, I mean, if there's any industry that has more at stake, I can't think of it other than the drug industry next year. And Pelosi went to their trade association 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and pretty much threatened them and said, we are going to come in with government price controls that we have the authority to do if y'all don't rein it in. And I guarantee you all these drug companies are going to be subpoenaed to justify their prices, the price hikes on these drugs that people need to stay alive. And I don't think they'll go as far as government price controls, but the threats are, I mean, I think Democrats will go big when it comes to reining in prices, and buying across borders ain't the solution. It's a Band-Aid, and the Trump administration will fix it, but they will not go as far as Democrats will. But whether Democrats could be successful, I don't know, because I can't think of a fundraiser that I go to where there's not a drug company lobbyist at the table.
Yeah, even in our building, our office building, 701 Pennsylvania Avenue, we've got probably 10 major pharma companies that all have teams of lobbyists that just swarm all over Capitol Hill, and that's just in one downtown DC building. It is, hopefully President Biden will be more successful in reining in drug prices than Donald Trump, but it's not for Trump's lack of trying. I think it's kind of shocking how aggressive they've been, but they can't executive order their way around this, and particularly when it comes to full drug price negotiation for Medicare and otherwise, they're going to need legislation for it.
I think that's answered my next question. You kind of answered for me, which is it seems like there's been all these executive orders and attempts at trying to rein in drug pricing and to increase transparency. And while we've seen some things happen at the state level, it just doesn't seem to ever go forward at the federal level. So I think that just kind of answered my question. So, but thank you for that. That was really helpful to get that perspective. So let's talk about some of these other game changers.
Yeah, I hit the next bullet. I think that this is the other thing that I just want to, just want everybody to be alert to it because there may ultimately be a call to action on this. The number one tax expenditure, which is the amount of revenue that the federal government would gain if you took away a tax break, is the exclusion from taxation of employee-provided group health insurance. Number two is 401ks. And then you go further down for charitable contributions and the home mortgage interest deduction. And so with all these mountains of debt, we always feel vulnerable on this. For the most part, I think Democrats have been, frankly, Republicans have been more challenging on this because the Paul Ryan view was always that this purest version of consumer-driven health spending, that we need to knock down the employer-provided system. I think the one time I always treasured my friendship with Paul Ryan because I'd known him since he was a staffer, but the one time I know I pissed him off was I heard him in a small setting. He said that the employer-provided group health insurance marketplace is a historic accident, and so my line was, well, penicillin was an accident too, but it kind of worked out pretty well. So we will, in any tax bills, we're going to have to make sure that we defend 100% deductibility. Republicans tried under Ryan to whittle away at that early on in tax reform in 2017, and we and the employer community went unhinged on it, and we were successful in getting that removed. Secondly, Joel did make reference to this Alexander Murray drug transparency legislation we've already discussed. So next one.
I have one quick question. Sorry to interrupt here, but we have a question going back to the prescription drug cost conversation. It's kind of related to this. Question is from the audience, can you give an example of the type of business the hedge funds are buying?
The biggest one that's gotten the most headlines are air ambulance services, but also private ambulance services. But a lot of even, the line that you always hear is that, you go to get a surgery with your plan, but it turns out the anesthesiologist wasn't on the plan. A lot of specialty anesthesiology practices. You can go on and on and on. It's astonishing how much has been sort of gobbled up. And again, look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a pro-growth Republican capitalist. I'd love to have me some hedge fund action. I'm not. I just think that this is an area where Americans won't tolerate the status quo. We may see some changes on Form 5500 reporting requirements. I think that, and we're even open to that on more prospective reporting. we took this to our board of directors. If we could get radical transparency throughout the healthcare ecosystem, and particularly for prescription drugs, then who the hell are we to say that we're for transparency for everybody but ourselves? And so, you know, this is definitely something we see as hopefully a part of a more comprehensive package. But as Joel said, you know, this is like the ACA stuff, the public option stuff. It's all about sequencing. And remember how Obama made a very big strategic error early on in his administration in pursuing the cap and trade climate bill, which never, he couldn't get to the finish line. And then they did the ACA. And so first up is going to be COVID relief. Then there's a huge burning desire for infrastructure, and they, you know, and they're going to have to do their tax packages. So the question is, where does the healthcare stuff fit into all that? To move on.
Did we lose Joel?
I think we might have lost some.
I think we might have lost him. I think
Yeah.
Go to the next slide. I think we're going to go
Okay.
into the races here. So I'm talking to, you know, Joel mentioned sequencing being one of the top priorities. That's my biggest question to every fundraiser that I go to right now, which is a lot, is what, and everyone's hearing different things. I was on a call yesterday with a member of the House Rules Committee, which has a heavy hand in drafting the agenda. And I had led a fundraiser for Speaker Pelosi a couple of weeks ago and asked her the same thing, like, how are you going to piece this out? I mentioned the cascading crisis that they're going to do. At some point, they're going to figure out how they're going to, at what state, what level, how are they going to sequence how are they going to address this? We heard from one member of House leadership, Democratic leadership last week, the way that they're going to do is they're going to look at the calendar. They're going to physically figure out when the House is going to vote on each issue and work backwards from there. So ACA, I will say, you know, Democrats believe, rightfully so, that they won the majority in 2018 off of the message of protecting pre-existing conditions. The number one issue for voters ever since the ACA passed has been rising health costs and health care. So they feel that they do have a mandate to go big and to deliver on ACA stabilization and healthcare reform. The question is, how big are they going to go? And, you know, not only is it how big are they going to go, but how much does that compete with the priorities right now post-COVID in this new environment with an economy in free fall? You know, the House has now passed 3 stimulus measures. We can't get leadership to agree on anything. So we haven't seen any real relief come since May for our economy. So we know the number one issue is going to be a stimulus package. Is the number 2 issue also going to be an infrastructure package along with green energy components to add to it? Or is it going to be an ACA package? And does the ACA package, does that also address rising drug costs? Does that address you know, the surprise medical billing issue? Certainly it's going to include some form of a public option. And the contours of that public option are going to be very much determined by who wins the election and what the margins look like in the Senate and in the House. And I will say, you know, I touched on this before, but, you know, Democrats are anticipating adding 10 to 15 seats to their House majority. And they, you know, how many seats they add to the Senate is going to determine really what the contours of this package look like. If it's a 51 seat majority, I don't think they'll have the votes to repeal the filibuster. And that's going to be key, right? If there's a filibuster, the chances of them getting any public option is nil. But if there's no filibuster, they'll probably get through it. I would imagine that they will. I would imagine that they will probably get rid of the filibuster, but they are going to have a lot of test votes first to demonstrate to the American people that the Republican minority is not willing to work with them. If the Republicans will work with them, I think that's great for all industries, and we will have more moderate legislation. But if the past 6 to 8 years is any measure, I don't anticipate Mitch McConnell working with Chuck Schumer on anything. So after they have a few failed votes on some key measures, they will say, we can't work with them. We're going to get rid of the filibuster. And once they do that, then it's game on. And Schumer has said as much, you know, with them moving forward with the ACB appointment in the middle of an election. He said everything is on the table. And by everything being on the table, he means eliminating the filibusters so that they can push through a lot of their more contentious priorities, potentially stacking the courts. I think that's a heavier lift, but you can anticipate them pointing to what they would argue stacking of the courts over the past 6 years, and having the Supreme Court be a more clear reflection of how many federal jurisdictions there are right now, which is 13. So they would push for 13 Supreme Court justices. And then you'll see an effort to add DC statehood, which would result in 2 arguably Democratic senators, and Puerto Rican statehood, which would add 2 senators, unclear though whether or not they would be Democratic or Republican. But so they would really potentially move to change the contours of the legislative process. That's like a big stretch, and that's what the progressives would love to see them do. It's going to be difficult to see, Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado, or Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, or Senator Bullock from Montana, and all these traditional red or purple states taking votes to stack the court. But that could be where we are at if there's not enough pressure for some moderate senators like Mitt Romney or Ben Sass, or some of the other moderate Republicans who aren't going to get beat, to work with Democrats. And if they can actually work with Democrats and get through the 60 vote threshold, we won't get rid of the filibuster, I don't think. And we could actually have some clearer stability. But with that said, I mean, so this is the map, right? So this is what we're working with. And Joel touched on this earlier, like it could be a bloodbath for Republicans. I can tell you that Democrats anticipate picking up, go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So these are the seats that are in play. Democrats anticipate, we'll go to one more slide.
Okay.
In the middle here are the toss-ups. I would say starting from the bottom, going up to the toss-ups, I would say almost every single one of those reds are going to lose, with the exception of Lindsey Graham, where Lindsey Graham is in a neck-and-neck race. The fundraising that has happened in that race blew away all the numbers. Lindsey Graham, his opponent, Jamie Harrison, broke all records by raising $57 million in the last quarter. That is insane. That said, South Carolina is not even in play for Joe Biden. And $57 million fundraising haul only gets Jamie Harrison neck and neck with Lindsey Graham. So there's a lot of enthusiasm on the Democrat side that we could beat Lindsey Graham, but I think it's hard for me to see that happening in South Carolina. So I bet Lindsey Graham holds on. That said, Democrats only need to pick up 3 seats to flip the Senate. I would argue those easiest 3 seats are going to be Cory Gardner from Colorado, Martha McSally in Arizona, and Tom Tillis in North Carolina. Those are the easier ones. After that, I think we're going to see Joni Ernst and Susan Collins really very close, the next tier, and I think that they will probably go down also. I think Susan Collins was more likely to lose than Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst in Iowa, I would guess, all the polls right now are neck and neck, 50-50. But Biden's doing really good with senior citizens, older Americans. Iowa's full of those, but I think if Biden wins Iowa, Joni Ernst will go down, and the competitor there will win. Steve Daines is pulling behind Steve Bullock in Montana. I think Bullock probably pulls that out. And if it's a sweep, which it's quite possible that it would be, as Joel mentioned earlier, a potential tsunami, we could see Georgia flip. There are 2 seats in Georgia that are up, and the Democrats are pulling neck and neck, and they're also breaking fundraising records. We could see Alaska go. Now, Alaska is really interesting. It's kind of like Montana, where they have a history of voting both ways. They voted Lisa Murkowski back in when she ran against a Republican as an independent. 6 years ago, they had a Democratic Senator, Mark Begich. And right now, the name of the Democrat candidate there escapes me, but Dan Sullivan is just pulling neck and neck with his Democratic opponent. But depending, again, on how big the wave is, Texas is potentially in play, as is Kansas. And I'll say I interviewed Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who's chair of the DSCC, and she talked a lot about tapping into the energy that is out there. And just by sheer numbers, by fundraising, by polling, we're pretty confident that the Senate's going to flip. The question is how much. And when she talks about that energy, I think about that when I watch the news and I see these long lines for people to vote, early voting in Georgia, in Arizona, in all these states. And by large margins, the people that are lining up early and standing in line for hours to vote tend to be Democrats, not Republicans. So this could be, everyone's pretty confident the Senate's going to flip. The question is by how much. To some degree, if you really value, if you value the power, preserving the power of the minority in the Senate, and you don't want to get rid of the filibuster, you might make the case that you want Democrats to win more seats, so that if they have closer to a 58, 59 seat majority, that would really empower some key Senate Republicans to give Democrats the 60th vote on some key legislation, and that would discourage getting rid of the filibuster. But if they're in a margin where there's 54, 55, we'll likely see the filibuster go away. If they only have the majority by 1 seat, by 51, 52, I already know of 2 to 3 Democratic senators that do not support getting rid of the filibuster. So it really depends on what the numbers are in the Senate as to what the fate of the filibuster is. You can go to the next slide.
So I think that this
this, what's happened to me in the last 10 or 15 minutes is just sums up 2020 for me politically, that Joel Copperwood just gets to completely give his spin on every one of these Senate races, while some Russian plot or Chinese plot to block out my laptop. So I apologize for that, gentlemen.
What I miss?
You know, I would argue that Kansas is not going to go, that Sue Collins may be the only human being that in the political predicament that she's in that could pull off an upset, because she knows more of her constituents per capita than any other member of the United States Senate. I think Dan Sullivan will be fine, but I agree that Alaska's squirrely. And what I've been hearing lately from Republicans is that Daines has been polling a little bit better, and then that's more neck and neck than you would have suggested. But the thing about it is, Wave years is that they tend to, I'm sure you noted that Doug Jones is going to lose in Alabama, so that's one Democratic seat that's gone. And Republicans are surprisingly competitive in Michigan with John James against Gary Peters. However, wave elections tend to break in one direction. They don't tend to, in all these neck and neck elections, they don't tend to break in two different ways. So, yes, could it be a tsunami? I remember 1980. I remember 1994. Both were big Republican years where we woke up the next day and there were a lot of accidental members of the House and of the Senate. So, and I actually agree with your argument that, that if they get up to 57 or 58, the only silver lining for Republicans as they then attempt to claw their way outside from the rubble of this presidency and the fervent nationalism is that maybe they won't take away the filibuster. I think that you may be right on that, Joel. But it'll be really hard for me to be finding any silver linings personally if the numbers are looking like that.
You can go to the next slide. Go one more. Yeah, I think we've covered all this. Go to one more. I'm trying to get to the House slides.
Yeah, if you look at the House stuff, Dan, on paper, Republicans are only 17 seats away from retaking the House, and you've got more than 30 Democrats that are occupying seats that Donald Trump won. But I don't know anybody. I literally, just in this lobby before we got on this call, was talking to a very senior and respected Republican member of Congress from Ohio, and they're circling the wagons right now. I mean, they're not seeing those very many opportunities. There are 4 or 5 races that Republicans may pick off, but you're looking at something in the high single digits to maybe up to 15 gains for Democrats in the House of Representatives, which could lead to in 2022. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going back to the title of the.
It could lead in.
But what is a House? Maybe you could just clarify for all of us, maybe including myself, what's the difference between a wave and a tsunami? Like, what would you say is a tsunami versus a wave in the House, for example? And
a wave would be these picking up 51, 52 margin. Tsunami would be 57, 58. All of these key races that Joel's talking about. But the problem is, we as a nation have just sorted ourselves so ideologically. I mean, I'd like to think that that if there's any silver lining to the lockdown, maybe perhaps it's people they only move to areas where people feel the same that they feel. And now the fact that I'm in Nashville right now and can do my job well, I thought as effectively. I can't get my damn laptop to work. Is maybe this will change things over time. But you look at that map of the House of Representatives, and Democrats really only exist in urban and close-in suburbs, and the rest of it looks like a sea of red. And that ideological sorting, I remember when I first started lobbying for this organization, the most valuable caucus on Capitol Hill were the Blue Dog Democrats, pro-business Democrats, mostly from the South, socially moderate. What did Republicans do when the Tea Party sort of emerged? They wiped out not the AOCs, not the urban liberals. They wiped out the blue dogs, who were the most reasonable. And I think we're seeing sort of, just as we had our Tea Party problem in my party, forgive the personal views, I'm sure there'll be some that are listening that disagree violently with me. But there's been something of a herbal Tea Party or a green Tea Party response on the left as well. Though Joel is correct, most of those who were the majority makers in 2018 were on the moderate side of the spectrum and in purplish types of districts. So it is barely conceivable that Republicans could retake control of the House of Representatives, even though on paper they should look like they're poised to.
And this will translate into how the legislation is crafted 100%. So just a couple hours ago, I was on a call with the chairwoman of the Blue Dog Caucus, the conservative part of the conservative Democrats, and they consider their mission to be fiscally responsible legislators. And she's got a lot of anxiety, and she's pushing Hoyer and Speaker Pelosi personally to ensure that, of course, a stimulus package should be top priority, as should COVID relief, as should ACA legislation. But her caucus, the Blue Dog Caucus, is going to grow the most when it comes to the three caucuses, the Progressive Caucus, the New Dem Caucus, and the Blue Dogs, when we pick up these seats in Trump districts. And if she's making the case hard that if we want to hold on to the seat, and if we want to these seats, and if we want a permanent majority, we've got to be cognizant about our spending, and we've got to rein it in. Now, in this environment, Democrats historically have always passed pay-go legislation right off the bat when they get the gavel. They're not going to do that this time. I mean, they got to go big to get the economy going again, and they know that. But they know that the people that gave them the majority come from moderate districts, and she is hell-bent to ensure that legislation that's considered on the floor is not written at the Speaker's office, that it actually goes through the committee process, and that these new moderate legislators are able to move the needle. So
let me,
yeah. Go ahead.
I can't see the slide. Let me, I want to do a couple of just real quick checks on myself, though. For all of my doom and gloom as a Republican, this is going to be a blowout year. Here's two things to check myself on. This also comes from Cook Political. In 2018, a great turnout year for Democrats. If you look at the base Democratic voter, which is college-educated women of all races, in 2018, 9 million college-educated women of all races failed to show up and vote. If you look at the Trump base, which is, of course, non-college educated white men, in 2018, 40 million of them failed to turn out and vote. So that whole issue of the hidden Trump voter, it's out there. I don't believe this, but I do want to check myself on it. The second and final thing I'll mention is a Monmouth University poll that was taken of registered Pennsylvania voters a couple of weeks ago. And it showed, unsurprisingly, that Joe Biden was ahead by 8 percentage points. However, they asked the follow-up question, who do you think that your
Lost him again.
Yeah,
maybe you want to give us just a look ahead. I know we're kind of getting low on time here. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left here. So maybe you want to kind of give us some predictions, some thoughts. Oh, looks like he reappeared. So you still with us, Joel? You're on mute. I don't know if he's on mute. You're on mute.
There we go.
I apologize.
There we go. Okay, good.
Technical stuff. I'll let you work this.
I think we're good. I think the only point with this slide here is that, you know, if you're looking forward now, again, we don't know what's going to happen in 2020, and we gave you our best take at it. But this, I mean, looking at 2022, Democrats are already anticipating losing seats, as they always do, as every party does that's in control. They lose seats in the midterm. The one issue that I would point to is that they are now going. 2022 will be the first Congress that reflects new congressional districts after the census, and after the state legislatures across the country draw new districts. I will tell you that the current districts were incredibly gerrymandered, and they're all going to be redrawn. And just because of the difference in Republican legislatures 10 years ago to Democratic legislatures and governorships now, no matter how you slice or dice it, Democrats are almost sure to pick up seats in 2022. So they will probably lose some seats, but I mean, the way that that districts are going to be redrawn, that could buffer any of their losses. So they might be in for a long haul of Democratic majority in the House, assuming they don't overreach, which is almost inevitable that they will. So we'll see. But with that, I mean, the next slide, I think that pretty much wraps up kind of how we see it. Potential battlegrounds. We can't tell you anything here that you're not seeing in the major polls. I will just note the tremendous fundraising efforts that are happening with Democrats, both from at the presidential level all the way down. Now, I can also tell you that Hillary Clinton wildly outspent Donald Trump and lost. Mitt Romney wildly outspent Barack Obama and lost. So money is no indicator as to how they're going to vote. But I mean, the money that is pouring in to these campaigns is just astounding and record-breaking. Thursday is the big next presidential debate. Again, I was on that call with Stephanie Murphy, chair of the Blue Dogs. She said that she really believed that he was really going to focus. He has the most to lose, clearly, in this last debate. And they're really going to be focusing on Hispanic voters. And his language will be geared towards Hispanic voters in Florida, specifically because a lot of Hispanic voters aren't necessarily guaranteed Democratic votes. In fact, they're about 50-50 between Democratic and Republican votes. And he's got a lot on the line when it comes to winning Florida in this next debate. So just if you plan on watching, I would be cognizant of the Florida politics, particularly Florida Hispanic politics. But I think that's what Joe Biden's going to be thinking of the most as he's making his case. And that said, obviously it's not about the popularity contest. I can almost guarantee you Joe Biden's going to win the popularity contest. But when it comes to reaching 270, that's a different game. But all the scenarios say that it's looking increasingly likely that it could be called on election night if the states that tally their votes early on election night go for Biden. And it's looking more and more like that could be the case, which would be incredible because there's a ton of anxiety in DC right now. I can tell you about social unrest, about what happens if the votes aren't counted. If it is close, then it's easy for either side to point to election fraud, and then losing faith in the electoral system is obviously the worst possible outcome. So it's looking like we'll have a clear winner at the end of the day. But again, this is like Joel was likes to say all the time, this is just conventional Washington politics, and we get it wrong all the time. So who knows? But with that, that's where we're at. Let's see if you guys have any other questions.
Right. Any other questions out there for anyone? Okay, we're just running out of time here, but no other questions. So looks like that's it for today. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and of course, special thank you to the Joels from CIAB, and really, I hope that this program was helpful for all of you. In adding perspective to what's impacting your organization's benefit plans and understanding what's to come in 2021 and the years ahead. So thanks again. Have a great day, and don't forget to vote. Great. Thank you.